Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Horror Stew. I am your host, Ike Isaacs, and today we are back with yet again another wonderful video about horror films. And today we're actually going to do a little something different. We are going to take a little bit of a different direction than what we've done before. In the past, we've talked about underrated horror films, things like The Terrifier. We recently had the video episode about Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. We also talked about internet urban legends like Slender Man, and we also have spoken about anthologies like Chillerama. That being said, today we're actually going to go the opposite direction. I'm going to talk about a film and film series that I consider to be one of the most overrated horror films of all time. Now, this is not to say that I don't enjoy them from just a casual viewing perspective, but these are films that I believe that, generally speaking, are given so much hype because of the type of horror films that they are, and there are some other factors as well that kind of go into that. But today, we are going to talk about Paranormal Activity. So, Paranormal Activity. So, of course, with Paranormal Activity, we have to go back to the beginning. It was 2007, and we were in the upswing of what I would consider a generation of found footage horror films. Now, there are a lot of Paranormal Activity movies, and I'm not going to go into each and every single one of them. But here's what I will say. The Paranormal Activity movies, the first few movies at least, in my opinion, they had a good formula, and they had the potential of being great, and I do think that they could have been better, but generally speaking, I would say the first two films are at least moderately exceptional. All right, so Paranormal Activity 1 in of itself kind of started I would personally say that Paranormal Activity 1 took inspiration from films like the Blair Witch Project, and they expanded on them in the new age. In the 2000s, there were a lot of different films that were made that were paranormal related, and there were a lot of films that were found footage. But Paranormal Activity went to the portion of the low end of the budget, and they also had a very unique concept, and it did well. Paranormal Activity 1, at least in my opinion, is a fantastic film. Like I said, I will say this: I say fantastic with a slight caution, because while it is a good movie, it still is going to fall into the category of being overrated. I like the film, but it's way overrated. A lot of people think that it's this pioneering movie, and in some ways it can be, but Paranormal Activity 1 it really, in my opinion, was not quite what a lot of people think that it should have been or what it really was. So taking it for what it was, Paranormal Activity 1 was a very interesting ghost story, all right? It was the start of a very interesting ghost story with an actual backstory. You know, sometimes we get these movies that don't really have a lot of exposition, not a lot of pre-interpreted information to provide that gives us a linear storyline. Sometimes it's like we really have to suspend belief and just really say this is what it is and go from there. But Paranormal Activity is about Katie and Micah, who are the two titular characters, and there are also some other side characters like priests and things like that. But specifically, Katie starts to experience hauntings. She had been experiencing them prior, but when she moved in, she continued to experiencing these hauntings and other paranormal events that would also impact Micah as well. So it's pretty straightforward. It's led to believe that the paranormal entity that is going on in this is a demon rather than just like a typical ghost, because it's following her. She's being like attached, right? And then, of course, in 2010, about 3 years later, they made Paranormal Activity 2. Paranormal Activity 2 is a direct sequel to Paranormal Activity 1. Paranormal Activity 2 is actually technically a prequel, because it's the start of the movie is before the first movie, because it is based on Katie's sister, Christy, who live somewhat closest, because I think there's a part in Paranormal Activity 2 where we actually see Katie and Micah. But Christy and her family, they live in California, and they start experiencing strange activity after her baby Hunter is born. And it's the film is actually, this one was pretty unique as well, because it uses security footage or security cameras, and in some scenes a handheld camera. So it kind of follows a similar formula to the first one. But basically, they start experiencing hauntings, which would then go on to impact Katie as well as Christy. So leave it at that. And then, of course, there's some additional films in the series. I'll touch on them briefly as we go along. But Paranormal Activity 3 is a prequel to both 1 and 2. It follows Katie and Christy as they were children. Paranormal Activity 4 follows a completely different family. And Katie, from the first 3 films, is obviously, this is the adult Katie, moves in near a character named Alex Nelson and her family that is residing in Nevada. So basically, Alex is helped by her boyfriend Ben, and they film some activity on via their MacBook camera, which is kind of interesting, a video camera, an iPhone camera, and Kinect technology, because it's following Katie and then her child, which is its name is Wyatt, but it's actually the child from the second film, Hunter. So it's some kind of a correlation there. And then there are 2 additional films, Paranormal Activity, the marked ones in 2014. Again, this falls in a completely other individual, but it tied to the film because Katie appears in it. There's also a cameo appearance from, I believe, Alex from it's the daughter from Paranormal Activity 2. And then there's the Paranormal Activity Ghost Dimension in 2015, which is, if I'm not mistaken, it's essentially, it's tied in somehow. I think there's like a flashback scene or something like that, but they're all tied together in some way, shape, or form. And then there is a 7th film that's been announced for March 4th, 2022 is when the filming's supposed to start. So that being said, we have the groundwork. We know what the films are about. I give them a little bit of prerequisite information to kind of give an idea of what these films are about, where we're coming from. So now we're going to move into the next stage about why I officially think that this series as a whole is overrated. So here would be my official statement on why the series itself is overrated. Now, again, I'm sorry if that prerequisite information was sped up because I was trying to get through it as quick as possible. Because truth be told, the content of the films is really hard to explain, because the reason I think that they're overrated is that they're not very well put together films, okay? So the story in of itself, it's actually a very interesting story, right? The story has a solid basis and a solid ground to stand on. However, the execution of that story is sometimes lacking in substance, my apologies. So it has a good basis, it has a good groundwork, but it just has a failure to launch in a lot of ways. Now, I will say, obviously, the first 3 films, I would say, are moderate to exceptional. They're very positively, I would say, rated films regarding the genre. But after the first 3 films, and I say the first 3 films lightly because in reality, the third film is okay, but it really kind of departs, in my opinion, from what the original films were about, and it really starts to get into some murky water in regards to the prequel nature of it. But for certain, Paranormal Activity 4, the marked ones, and the Ghost Dimension are all substandard films, okay? I can go into it as a casual viewer, and I can suspend enough belief to enjoy the films. However, as a whole, those latter 3 films of the franchise are just not good, not at all. And in one of my previous videos, my previous Geek Rants video earlier this week, I talked about working in a movie theater, and I was working in a movie theater when the marked ones came out and when the Ghost Dimension came out. So, both of these films have a huge following because of the fact that they're horror films. And, if I'm not mistaken, they're both rated R, I believe. Maybe one of those rated PG-13, but don't get me into PG-13 horror movies. That may be something I talk about next time. But specifically, the Paranormal Activity marked ones and the Ghost Dimension had such a huge following and had a very young audience, I feel like. Because these are the kind of films that people go watch, and they watch them just because they're scary. But that being said, that's pretty much that all these movies have going for them, is that they're about ghosts or demons, is that they're spooky a little bit. And that's just it. That's really all that it has going for it. The story, it's so diluted in some of these latter films that it just misses the point. Really, it just misses the point overall. And I just feel like people wanted to watch these films and they thought they were these great films because they were about ghosts. And I feel like people have to really discern whether or not the content is good, like the story is good, or the movie's actually good. Because there are a lot of movies that have really great stories and a lot of really great groundwork and a lot of good framing and everything else. But then they just, like I said, they really fail in execution. And I feel like that's the issue that Paranormal Activity has. The first few films, they really had a cohesive story that led each other to each one. You know, the Paranormal Activity 1 movie had a very clear connection to 2 and 2 to 3. And while I didn't really care for 3, it still had a very solid connection. That's why I included it in that statement. But the latter 3 films, while they have connections, they start going into tangents. And the issue that I have with a lot of horror films, and this is something I'll talk about sometime as well, is that a lot of long-term horror films that are released over a period of time, they start to dilute. They start to spawn and span into different directions that don't make sense. You know, and the biggest issue that I've had with the Paranormal Activity films is that the characters from the first few films, obviously, they die. Okay, that's all I'm going to say is that the first few films, they in some way, shape, or form are either dead or possessed, right? That's not a spoiler. I'm making a general statement. Don't kill me, please. But that being said, they probably could have they could have either stopped making the films after 3, or they should have done what they did with the first 3 movies and create another groundwork. Use the same content, but make another basis, you know, build another framework. But instead of building more framework, instead of building more ground for them to stand on, they're basically they're grabbing at air. They're grabbing at loose straws, because the latter 3 films are such cash grabs that literally that's all it is that they're just making more movies with the words Paranormal Activity in the title, trying to make money. And that's a problem. That is a huge problem. But I'm not going to keep going on. I would rate the first 3 movies 3 out of 5. I would rate the latter 3 movies 1 out of 5. And I've never ever, this will probably be one of the few times that I ever rate a movie 1 out of 5. But it's just, when you have a film series that has a solid groundwork, typically you start making movies and they're either consistent and or better than the predecessors. At least in my opinion, that's how it should work. But this film did the exact opposite. They had 3 really great films, and then they had 3 films that, for lack of a better term, sucked ass. I mean, and a lot of people like these films just because they're called Paranormal Activity, but they're not focusing on the fact that these films are literally just being made because Paranormal Activity. And I don't know, maybe I'm nitpicking because they're using it as a cash grab, but if they had named the movies anything else and cut all ties to the original movies, honestly, I would have probably been okay with it. And quite frankly, with the marked ones in the Ghost Dimension, you could have done that. Now, with Paranormal Activity 4, obviously, there was a clear connection. It just was a poorly perspective movie. But with the marked ones in Ghost Dimension, they could have honestly left out Paranormal Activity. And honestly, I probably would have thought the movie was still bad. But they were trying so hard to connect it to these other movies that it just didn't make sense. So that being said, first 3 movies, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Pretty solid. They have a good basis. They have good groundwork. Like I said, sometimes there were some issues with the execution. But then the last 3 films, absolute dog shit in my opinion. 1 out of 5. I could grade it a 0 out of 5, I guess, but I'm not going to be that mean, I suppose. But 1 out of 5 on the original, or the 3 sequels after the 3rd film. And then really, I'll save my judgment for the 7th film. I don't know what it is about horror movies, but they obviously are going to continue to make movies until they won't make money over them anymore. So, in the rumor that I had heard about the 7th movie, and this is something that makes me at least maybe a little more happy, is that the 7th movie is in theory supposed to be kind of a remake of the series. And if it is, I will watch it and I will enjoy it. But if it is a yet another cash grab at trying to make money off of the name Paranormal Activity, I will more than likely hate it. So keep that in mind if anybody cares. But otherwise, we're going to end it right there. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think about the Paranormal Activity movies in the comments section down below. If you have opinions about it, or if you really love the movies, tell me why you love the movies. You know, did you like them for the reasons that I liked them, or did you hate them for reasons that I didn't mention, or any of that? So that being said, you guys have a wonderful rest of your Friday, because it's Friday, baby. And you stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, and keep on growing. See ya.